In the years following the Russian Revolution of 1917, everything that the Bolsheviks could lay their eyes on became a political instrument. Human body was not an exception. The new Soviet world was obsessed with transformation of land, of industry, and of course of the man. Factories rose where villages had stood, and with them came a new question: how do we create the most efficient worker? In the 1920s, the idea of the new Soviet man became a central theme in the country. He was to be efficient and tireless, ready to give every ounce of himself to the collective. His individuality was to dissolve into the motion of the machine. The human body was now nothing more than a site of production, a mechanism that had to be perfected. This vision found its laboratory in the Central Institute of Labor, founded in 1920 by Aleksei Gastev, a poet turned engineer who believed that the revolution must continue inside the worker's body. He called his project Taylorism with a proletarian face, inspired by Frederick Winslow Taylor's methods of scientific management. Gastev and his team used photography, metronomes, and timing devices to dissect and reassemble human motion. The Institute's motto was simple: we shall remake the man. Gastev's engineers analyzed the most ordinary gestures as hammering, shoveling, or turning a crank and broke them down into fragments just to rebuild them anew according to mathematical precision. With the use of technology, they photographed workers' swing frame by frame and analyzed it to make sure not a single angle was left untouched. Every repetition was meant to train the body into machine-like efficiency. Working efficiently meant you were a good part of the collective. At the same time, another figure was quietly redefining the study of human movement: Nikolai Bernstein, a neurophysiologist and biomechanist whose work would later influence generations of motor scientists. Bernstein's laboratory was very different from Gastev's workshops, but his questions were similar. What is coordination and dexterity? What makes a movement efficient, adaptable, and alive? In the 1930s, Bernstein developed techniques to record motion using high-speed film and chemographs. He traced the paths of black dots painted on the body of the worker, transforming physical motion into graphic lines. What he discovered through this innovative approach was unsettling for those who wanted total predictability. Real movement that solves a motor problem, he found, was never a perfect repetition. It was highly variable and shaped by constant feedback between the brain, muscles, and the environment. He found that to move well is to be adaptable. His famous study of hammering, where he recorded the motion of skilled metal workers, showed that the most efficient strike was not the most mechanical, as was believed at the time, but the most intelligent. Skilled workers used micro-adjustments in real time that no machine could replicate. Not any pair of their movements were exactly identical. Bernstein's conclusion was revolutionary. In his experiments, he found that the movement was an open dialogue between the body and the world. Within the Soviet ideological climate, however, his findings had a double edge. The state wanted control and predictability, and the discoveries of Bernstein did not go in line with the state policy. As the Soviet Union moved deeper into Stalin's industrial phase, the same system that celebrated the body as an instrument of progress began to turn against those who studied it too freely. Bernstein became one of its most tragic examples. By the late 1940s, the political climate in Soviet science had hardened. Campaigns against cosmopolitanism and bourgeois formalism targeted anyone whose methods appeared too Western, too theoretical, or too independent from party ideology. In 1950, during the so-called Pavlov session organized by the Soviet Academy of Sciences, a public campaign was launched to reaffirm Ivan Pavlov's theories of conditioned reflexes as the only acceptable foundation of Soviet physiology. Bernstein's dynamic systems theory of movement was singled out as a direct threat to the Pavlovian dogma. Where Pavlov saw behavior as a chain of mechanical reflexes, Bernstein revealed motion as a living process which is adaptive, self-organizing, and irreducible to simple cause and effect. And he did not hold himself back from criticizing Pavlov's theories. To Stalin's ideologues, this was not just heresy in science, it was heresy in politics, a vision of the human being as unprogrammable. Bernstein's research was denounced as anti-Pavlovian and idealist. His lab was dismantled, his publications withdrawn, his students reassigned. At a public meeting of his institute, Bernstein was labeled an uprooted cosmopolite. He quietly replied in the hearing, "Why do you call me uprooted? I know my father and even my grandfather very well." This was a small act of defiance, but in that moment he defended the very principle that guided his work, that movement, like identity, is contextual and alive. For several years that followed, he lived in near isolation, writing quietly, refusing to conform. He continued to publish under his own name, even as his work was blocked from official journals. When Stalin died in 1953 and ideological pressure slowly lifted, Bernstein theories began to reappear. First abroad, where they found resonance with the new sciences of cybernetics and motor control, and much later back in the Soviet Union. By the time of his death in 1966, his manuscripts were being cited by scientists who recognized him as a pioneer, far ahead of his time. Bernstein's persecution revealed the paradox of the Soviet vision, a culture that worshipped physicality yet punished those who understood its complexity. In the middle of the glorification of overwork and the myth of the perfect laborer, there was a scientist who tried to show that human motion was not mechanical at all. His research was quietly sidelined during Stalin's purges, and it is not clear till this day who was at the bigger loss, Bernstein or the system that pushed out such a brilliant mind. Meanwhile, Soviet society marched toward industrialization with growing intensity, not being convinced by Bernstein theories. Factories became theaters of synchronized movement. In propaganda films, workers appeared as perfectly choreographed collectives. In 1935, a coal miner named Aleksei Stahanov reportedly mined 102 tons of coal in a single shift. It was 14 times his quota. The story, widely publicized by Pravda newspaper, became the seed of a new ideology, the Stahanovite movement. It was held up as proof that the new Soviet man could transcend biological limits through discipline and belief in the socialist cause. Overnight, the body became once more a stage of propaganda. Posters and films glorified the worker as a machine of perfect rhythm. The Stahanovites were paraded as heroes, yet their records were often fabricated or achieved under highly staged conditions. Behind the celebration lay coercion. Managers imposed impossible quotas. Exhaustion and accidents rose sharply in factories and mines. Those who failed to meet the new norms were accused of sabotage or laziness. The USSR punished the crimes of character. The state no longer needed biomechanics to understand the worker. It needed slogans. The Stahanovite movement blurred the line between labor and performance. It demanded that people move beyond their capacity to fit into the narrative of the regime. Soviet cinema of the late 30s depicted workers whose gestures mirrored those of machines, perfectly synchronized with the clatter of assembly lines. This transformation marked the full realization of the Soviet ideal, the worker as an embodiment of the state, the moving part in a vast ideological mechanism. The individual had vanished, only rhythm and output remained. Even leisure was absorbed into the system. The Ready for Labor in Defense, Gastev in Russian, program, introduced in 1931, standardized physical education across the nation. School children, soldiers, and factory workers were tested on running, throwing, and strength exercises. Their scores were recorded and their bodies were ranked. Physical training was a form of preparation for productive labor and implicitly for war. Movement was standardized across generations. The logic of measurement extended everywhere. Sports institutes and physiology labs borrowed directly from industrial methods. Athletes were filmed, dissected by angles, timed by devices derived from factory chronometers. The boundary between worker and athlete blurred. Both were models of the efficient body built to serve collective purpose. Yet, within this vast machinery, traces of another understanding persisted, the one Bernstein and some of his contemporaries hinted at. They recognized that the human being is not a perfect automation, that control comes not from elimination of error but from the capacity to adapt, a principle that system could not fully absorb. This tension between control and adaptation defined much of the Soviet approach to movement. In every factory, every gymnasium, and every parade, the same paradox played out. The state sought to discipline bodies into uniformity, while the nature of human movement resisted total predictability. The ideal worker was supposed to move like a machine, but the more they tried to engineer him, the more his body revolted. The Soviet obsession with movement efficiency changed not only how people worked, but how they perceived themselves. Time was fragmented into measurable units. Motion was stripped of spontaneity and replaced by rhythm imposed from above. The workplace became a space of choreography, where gesture was governed by the state. And yet, in this process, something profound was also uncovered. By studying movement so closely, Soviet scientists inadvertently mapped the poetry of labor, the hidden intelligence of the body that learns through doing. They tried to mechanize it, but what they revealed was life itself, the body's endless capacity to adapt, to solve problems, to find rhythm even under command.
Предприятие – это не просто сумма отдельных рабочих мест, собранных под одной крышей. Предприятие – сложнейшая кооперация рабочих мест, объединенная в систему.
The dream of the mechanized man eventually faded. Gastev was executed in 1939 during the Great Terror. Bernstein's work was almost forgotten until decades later, but the legacy still lingers. The stopwatch, the posture chart, the calibrated gestures, these are all descendants of the same dream, that through movement we can reshape humanity. Today, the rhetoric of optimization has simply changed its language. Efficiency, productivity, self-improvement, they echo the same principle once born in Soviet laboratories and factories. The worker's body has become the modern professional's body, the athlete's body, the fitness enthusiast's body, all trained, measured, and endlessly adjusted. The Soviet experiment revealed something that remains true. Movement is never neutral. Every system that tries to control it leaves its trace on how we live, work, and think. To move is to carry history and sometimes to resist it.